The colorful world of Monster High takes a drastic turn when viewed through a more realistic lens, giving the daughters of classic horror monsters a look that is much truer to their origins. Artist Anira M. presents illustrations of these characters in a highly unique style, reimagining the series to showcase the genuine horror that monsters are actually supposed to evoke. Their designs are much closer to how the characters would look if they truly inherited their parents' most unsettling traits, completely stripping away the bright and cheerful atmosphere of Monster High, and replacing it with one that turns classic high school adventures into absolute nightmares. Gulia yelps, daughter of the zombies in the Monster High universe. In the original version, she's known as the smartest, sharpest, and hardest working student at the school, created specifically to break the stereotype of the brainless zombie. Her concept always played around with that irony, but in this reimagining, the approach changes quite a bit. The censored parts of the illustration seem to hint at decaying flesh falling off her body, pushing the design into much more gruesome territory. The open mouth and almost skeletal nostrils give her a vibe closer to classic zombie imagery, stepping away from the stylized aesthetic the original franchise is known for. It's a good design, it works, and you instantly recognize it's Gulia. However, the concept could have been pushed even further, since the zombie archetype offers so many visual possibilities to explore decay, asymmetry, or even more unsettling details. Still, the reimagining hits its mark. It keeps the character's identity intact while adapting her to a darker, more disturbing aesthetic. Claudine Wolf, daughter of the werewolf in the Monster High universe, is introduced as the brave and loyal leader of the pack. Her dream is to become a successful fashion designer, and her style has always been one of the most iconic, blending her animal traits like her ears and fangs with leopard prints, bull's colors, and gold accents that reinforce her fierce and confident personality. In her realistic version, the design doesn't stray too far from her original essence, but it does incorporate some more unsettling nuances. You can pick up on touches of analog horror that make her look like a raw or wilder wolf, perhaps a bit more exaggerated in her proportions or expression. Even so, she keeps key elements like her spiked jacket, maintaining that instant connection to her classic look. At her core, she's still a recognizable werewolf archetype with sharp teeth and a commanding presence. That mix of familiarity and rawness is exactly what makes the final result stand out so much. Frankie, daughter of Frankenstein's monster, and to many, the main protagonist of the Monster High universe. Her story begins as the new girl at school, trying to fit in while figuring out who she is and where she belongs in that world. She quickly befriends Draculaura, and shortly after forms her own tight-knit group. Frankie has always been known for being friendly, sweet, and polite, with a touch of clumsiness that makes her endearing. Her original design reinforces that archetype: visible stitches, a slightly gothic yet stylized aesthetic, and a vibe that's more innocent than scary. However, in this new version, the focus shifts. The redesign is much more unsettling. She could almost pass for more of a zombie than Gulia herself. She has a deformed face, twisted limbs, and sunken eyes that give her a blank, disturbing expression. The artist mentioned drawing inspiration from Leatherface, and that influence is glaringly obvious in her exaggerated features and the gruesome finish. That detail, far from stripping away her identity, actually enhances the reimagining and makes it even more interesting. It's an uncomfortable redesign to look at, but that's exactly why it works so well within this darker aesthetic. Draculaura is a vampire, originally from Transylvania, and the adopted daughter of Dracula within the Monster High universe. She attends the school as a student, and having spent much of her childhood in the vampire court, she's used to certain luxuries and attention, something that constantly reflects in her personality. Her wardrobe has a clear Victorian inspiration, combining elements tied to her vampire heritage with her own unique style. Pink tones, hearts in different shapes, and sparkly layers dominate her look, softening her dark aesthetic and making her more charming than terrifying. terrifying. But in this more realistic version, the vibe completely changes. That disproportionately large mouth turns the design into something much more unsettling. It even begs the unavoidable question of whether this version would still be vegan, like in the original series. The reimagining exaggerates her vampiric features, pushing them to a truly disturbing point without entirely losing the recognizable essence of the character. Laguna Blue, daughter of a sea monster. In her original design, she has light cyan skin, lime green eyes, and soft features that balance her aquatic nature with the stylized appearance typical of the show. In the new version, the approach is much more realistic. Her eyes become darker and her mouth more prominent, reinforcing the animalistic side of her concept. The result is a reimagining closer to a deep-sea fish than a stylized hybrid creature. Cleo Denial, a mummy who, despite being born human, is a student at Monster High. As royalty, she usually takes on a leadership role at the school. In her original version, she comes across as confident, elegant, and somewhat bossy. Her appearance retains human features combined with bandages and ancient Egyptian-inspired details. In the realistic redesign, her look is much closer to a historical mummy. She isn't overly grotesque, but definitely more faithful to the idea of a preserved corpse. That more grounded approach makes her feel creepier, almost as if you were looking at a recently unearthed pharaoh. Spectre Vondergeist, a ghost and a school's gossip reporter, has always been known for her ethereal presence and her role as an influential figure at school. In her realistic version, the design emphasizes her nature as a spirit. Her features are longer and more shadowy, sporting an aesthetic reminiscent of contemporary horror, while also feeling heavily inspired by Edvard Munch's painting, The Scream. This reimagining does a brilliant job of conveying the feeling of looking at an intangible entity. Abby Abominable, daughter of the Yeti and an exchange student from the Himalayas, was always portrayed as strong and blunt. The realistic version keeps her sturdy build and her connection to the cold, but with a finish much closer to an actual mountain creature. Her gaze and facial features are imposing, leaning heavily into the myth of the abominable snowman. Scara Screams, inspired by the Banshee from Irish folklore, was introduced as one of the more reserved characters in the franchise. In this redesign, her expression and facial structure reinforce the omen-like nature associated with banshees, whose screams are a sign of misfortune and tragedy. Without even needing to over-exaggerate her features, the design gives off a more serious vibe that perfectly aligns with her mythological origins. Skeleta Calaveras, inspired by Mexican folklore and the Day of the Dead, her original design blends a skeletal form with colorful, traditional elements. The redesign opts for a portrayal closer to an actual human skeleton, though it still retains the cultural details in her outfit. The result is a much more anatomically faithful take on the bone concept, without losing her identity. Twyla, daughter of the boogeyman, was introduced as a shy student whose original appearance didn't directly reflect her origins. In this reimagining, her features are slightly deformed, taking on a gloomier air that connects much better with the figure of the boogeyman. The design manages to reinforce her inspiration without losing visual consistency. Venus McFlytrap, inspired by a carnivorous plant, originally combines an alternative punk aesthetic with botanical elements like vines and leaves. In the AU, her integration with the vegetation is much more obvious. The plants seem to be an active part of her body, giving a more organic and less decorative impression. The carnivorous plant concept is taken much more literally here. Gigi Grant and Ginny Grant, based on the figure of the genie, maintain a stylized humanoid appearance in their classic versions. In the reimagining, although they keep their original foundation, the details hinting at their supernatural nature are heavily accentuated. The duality between the human and the ancient is felt much more clearly, reinforcing the idea that wishes can come with dangerous consequences. Rebecca Steam, daughter of a mad scientist, is inspired by the classic idea of a robot. Her original version features a steampunk aesthetic with visible gears, metal plating, and a design that blends the mechanical with the stylized. In this AU reimagining, the concept becomes much more realistic. She's no longer seen just as a mechanical girl with cute decorative details, but rather as a machine desperately trying to mimic human appearance and falling just short. That gap creates an uncanny valley effect, where something almost human becomes slightly disturbing. The exposed wires and mechanical parts reinforce this idea. The contrast between her robotic frame and her attempt to look human is exactly what makes this redesign work so well. Rochelle Goyle, a student inspired by a gargoyle within Monster High, in her original design, she already conveys that mix of elegance and solidity with a stone-like texture, defined wings, and delicate features. In the show, she isn't portrayed as an aggressive monster, but rather as a typical teenager, as we're used to seeing in the series. In this AU version, the concept is dialed up. It leans much closer to the traditional idea of gargoyles in mythology and architecture, where rather than just ornaments, they were symbolic figures of protection, built to withstand the test of time. Here, she truly looks like an entity that has just descended from a Gothic cathedral. The stony texture is much more apparent, and her expression is noticeably darker. Her gaze in particular gives off a haunting vibe that reinforces her role as a guardian. It's a redesign that respects her core essence, but takes her into a much more imposing, realistic territory, making her one of the absolute standout reinterpretations in this AU. Technically, this is how Rochelle would end up anyway, since in Monster High lore, when a gargoyle reaches old age, they turn into a more realistic looking gargoyle. Viperin is the daughter of Stheno, Medusa's sister, and is visually inspired more by Medusa's mythology and appearance. Her classic design keeps the living hair concept. The snakes are an essential part of her look, and the whole outfit sticks to the show's stylized vibe, balancing the monstrous with the aesthetic. In this AU version, that monstrous foundation is preserved, but with a much creepier twist. The snakes take center stage, and their expressions, especially those pronounced smiles, had a much more unsettling layer to the concept. The redesign honors the character's mythological roots, but adapts her to a darker tone, achieving a more intense version without losing consistency with her origins. Astronova, introduced as an alien in Monster High. Out of all the designs in the franchise, hers is one of the most unconventional, as her concept steps away from classic monsters and goes for a flashier, more cosmic aesthetic. Her original version stands out for its bright colors and a stylized look that suggests an alien origin without any overly bizarre features. She keeps proportions that are fairly close to human, which is standard for the series. In this AU version, the approach completely shifts. Here, she actually feels closer to the popular idea of an extraterrestrial, with proportions that don't quite look entirely human, an expression that's hard to read, and a kind of beauty that feels slightly uncomfortable. The result is unsettling, though she still retains a peculiar vibe that can be seen as curious or even weird in a fascinating way. The artist drew inspiration from the imagery associated with Ashtar Sharan, a figure linked to UFO beliefs. The most famous depiction of this figure shows a frontal pose, hand extended, staring directly at the viewer, elements perfectly mirrored in Astronova's composition in this AU. You can also spot the similarity in the use of vibrant colors and intense lighting, which reinforces the visual reference and gives this reimagining a much more mystical, otherworldly aura. Perry and Pearl, conjoined twins and daughters of the Hydra. They share one body but have two heads with distinct personalities. They had a major presence in the movie Monster High: Great Scarier Reef, where their dynamic is explored in an underwater setting. In the original version, they stand out because of their clashing temperaments. Even though they are physically bound together, each maintains her own identity, leading to fun interactions as they learn to coexist and deal with others. In this AU, the focus pivots to something closer to body horror. The idea of sharing a single body becomes much more uncomfortable and visually shocking. The fusion is no longer just a quirky trait, but a condition that seems to cause tension and physical strain. Operetta, inspired by the Phantom of the Opera and based on the titular figure. Her original design sticks to the franchise's signature aesthetic, In fact, the show barely even hints at the horror elements of the original work, and her scarring isn't really shocking at all, allowing her appearance to blend in naturally with the rest of the cast. In this AU, however, the facial deformity becomes much more obvious and pronounced. It marks a shift in the core feature of her visual identity. The result pushes her closer to the idea of a tragic, disturbing figure, highlighting the darker side of her original concept and turning her into a much more intense presence within this reimagination. Cupid, the adopted daughter of Eros, and Monster High's reimagining of the classic Cupid figure. In the show, she plays the role linked to love and romantic destiny, sporting an aesthetic that mixes the ethereal with soft goth. In this AU version, she loses a lot of that sweet aura and edges closer to something unnerving. Her design is heavily reminiscent of the weeping angels from Doctor Who, especially with that statue-like appearance that looks like it might move the second you look away. The feeling of rigidity combined with an ambiguous expression creates a really interesting contrast between innocence and a looming threat. Corazon, daughter of the Manananggal, a creature from Philippine mythology capable of severing its torso from its legs, is shown in this AU with a much rawer approach, light years away from her design in the series. Her appearance leans heavily into the grotesque, featuring visible organs and organic details designed specifically to make you uncomfortable. The imagery is explicit and immediately striking to the eye. It's a take that goes all in on shock value, ditching the cleaner aesthetic of the official designs to perfectly match the dark tone of this AU. Kala, daughter of the Kraken. Her original version already starts with a hybrid base between a human and a sea creature. Her design mixes stylized features with octopus elements, which inherently gives her a unique presence among the cast. This AU keeps that human-octopus hybrid idea, but delivers a much more intense, less stylized finish. The blend of human and marine biology becomes way more pronounced, which can be pretty jarring at first glance. Personally, this is one of the redesigns that sold me the least within the AU. Though that doesn't mean it's bad, it stays consistent with the darker approach and definitely has its own unique appeal within this universe. Wydona, daughter of Arachne, is a creative student capable of spawning multiple arms, reflecting her spider-like nature. She usually comes off as independent and confident. In this AU, I absolutely love that they gave her a much more literal spider appearance. It creates a great contrast with the creedy factor and does nothing short of reawakening the arachnophobia in anyone who looks at her. Jennifer Long, daughter of the classic Chinese dragon. She comes from an ancient dragon lineage and was raised under strict rules, carrying a strong sense of honor. In this AU, she leans much more heavily into the realistic look of that specific mythology. She feels more real here, literally just a dragon adapted into human form. Really well done, that's all I can say. Toralei Stripe, daughter of the Werecat, is a fiercely competitive and cunning student who plays the rival role at school. Her feline personality has always been a key part of her story. In this AU, however, she is terrifying. It's a stark contrast to her original show design, and even though it strays pretty far from the initial concept, it absolutely nails that analog horror vibe typical of this AU. And that's going to be it. Don't forget to check out the original artist's socials linked in the description. If you want to see more stories like this, let me know in the comments. I'll be reading them.